Hey guys, we're back updating the power rankings for Big Brother 27 towards the end of week 5, which was another pretty interesting week if you ask me, and also one that really shakes up the power rankings here, where I feel like with the way things broke down this week, with how the cons broke down to who's likely to go home, I feel like this is going to be a pretty interesting ranking to break down here. And truth be told, I feel like no one's playing that well at the end of the day, to where even the people that I have towards the top of the list are people that I'm not feeling that great about. Though considering just how low I am on a lot of these other people, I mean, it is going to make for an interesting ranking nonetheless. Now, I am recording this on Tuesday, August 12th, and if you're new to the channel, or if you only follow the show through the televised episodes, I will be discussing the events of the live feeds, and in doing so, I'll be spoiling the results of both the veto competition and the veto meeting. So if you don't want to be spoiling that stuff, now's your chance to click out of this video. But with that out of the way, we have 14 people to talk about, and to waste more time, let's go into the video. So starting off at number 14, we have the latest boot from the season, and here we have Jimmy. And again, Jimmy going out here was not too shocking. He was a pretty clear target by the time of the eviction, and he was pretty bound to go home unless he won the BB Blockbuster, which he didn't, and thus he was voted out here. Though with that said, it was interesting seeing Rachel trying to campaign for him, trying to flip the vote at the last moment, to the point where Ashley voted to keep him, only for her to later try to change the vote, but Julie didn't allow it. So again, there was some humor to be had with his actual eviction, though at the end of the day, I feel like Jimmy kind of brought it upon himself, where I feel like he really pushed away the likes of Mickey and Morgan during his HOH reign in week 2, and while he did try to mend that, it was a bit too late. And by the time he was taken out, it was in a spot to where Mickey was the HOH and was the one who was actively making the move to take him out here. So in a way, he did bring it upon himself. And while you can definitely criticize Mickey for making the wrong move by taking out someone who's loyal to her, I feel like you have to fault Jimmy just as much for getting Mickey to want to target him and to not trust him. And I think that a lot of that stems back to his actions from previous weeks. So at the end of the day, I feel like Jimmy's game was pretty bad, and I feel like he definitely brought it upon himself by the end of it. Though with that said, he was still a pretty big player across these first couple of weeks here, and I got at least some humor with him trying to make these big TV moments, only for it to come off as very scripted and manufactured, and with him targeting Keanu and making all these speeches and him throwing his sunglasses. I feel like there was some fun to be had here, and I'm definitely glad we got Jimmy for the time that we did, but obviously he's now out of the game to where he's here at number 14. And with that, we have 13 people left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I've been ranking them based on how lucky I think they are to win the game based on their current game position. But at number 13, the person I believe is the least likely to win from this point on is the person who is the most likely to be evicted on Thursday night, at least at this current point. And that is Zach. And obviously, the big thing with Zach is his decision to not use his power, where he essentially had a get out of jail free card with his 10,000K veto that he could have used to save himself, and yet he decides to not use it despite being on the block, and despite also being told that he wasn't as safe as he thought initially. And obviously, there's a lot to be said here with whether this was a game move or not, and I do think it was not a game move. I think he just wanted to keep the $10,000 and was annoyed at the point where Ava put him up, as he thought he would have been able to keep it. And considering how lousy the stipends are for Big Brother, given the time commitment, you can at least see why he would want to secure the $10,000 for a month's worth of work. Though at the same time, why sign up for Big Brother if you're fine just walking away with $10,000, as I feel like there's a lot of other reality shows that would have gotten a better rate of return. But if we are looking at this from a pure game perspective, there is no excuse for this. I mean, he is essentially giving up guaranteed safety for $10,000 and could go home on Thursday night, where it seems at this point that he is the most likely of the 3 nominees to go out. It seems like unless he wins the blockbuster, he is for sure going out, where people have talked about wanting to keep Vince over him. And now it seems like people will keep Keanu over him as well. It seems like Zach is in the worst spot here. And while I could say that even if he had used the power, that he would have been in a bad spot anyway, with him being for sure guaranteed to lose a number, whether it be Vince or Morgan, I feel like him not using the power here takes away any benefit that he could have by using it in the future, to where now if he uses it in the future, it'll just make him look like an idiot to the other house guests, as they knew that he was in danger, and yet he didn't use it the first time he was in danger. And on top of that, it also makes him look very short-sighted by him valuing $10,000. And I feel like that'll just further center the fact that he has $10,000 already, which will make him an even bigger target. I feel like by him not using the power at the first opportunity, it not only puts him in danger of being voted out this week, but it also turns the power itself into a liability for his game, even if he does stay, to where now if people find out that he had this power, had this get out of jail free card, then they'll just question why he didn't use it, and it'll just make people think of him less as a player. So I feel like at the end of the day, him not using this power is such a terrible move. And yes, while there is some talk about the vote shifting to where he could still stay, not to mention the blockbuster, I feel like the singular decision for him to not use his power when he knew that he was not going to be lock safe on the block is such a major knock to me that I had to have him at the very bottom. So because of that, he is here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we have yet another person currently on the block, and here we have Keanu. And Keanu's on here as he's probably the second most likely person to go out this week after Zach. And on top of that, he has been doing more Keanu things where he continues to overestimate his position in the house. And with him knowing that he's not the primary target for this week, it's led to him being really overconfident and him talking about these crazy plans like using the veto on Vince if he had the chance to do so. Also him talking about throwing the blockbuster to Vince, thinking he'll have the votes to stay. And you also have him thinking that Mickey was testing him early in the week and really campaigning against Mickey. And once that got back to Mickey, that caused Mickey to consider targeting him instead. And on top of that, you also have Rachel telling him about the heavy hitters, only to just relay that back to Vince. And I feel like Keanu just really trusts Vince too much, which is pretty bad considering that Vince is also on the block against him. And you could definitely see a case for Vince using what Keanu is doing to throw Keanu under the bus, to where if it's Keanu versus Vince at the end of the week, that I feel like that'll just give Vince more of a chance of staying over Keanu. So I feel like Keanu is someone who, while he has improved his position slightly over the past week, I feel like he's still far from a perfect player. He still has some pretty abysmal reads in the house. I feel like him recognizing his improved position has led to overconfidence and him kind of overplaying his hand. And I feel like there's still a world where he goes out this week, where while Zach is the primary target at this point, I feel like he is still someone who could go out, and I could still see a world where he sabotages himself moving forward, especially if Zach does win the blockbuster. So I'm not feeling great about Keanu at this current point, which is why he's here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and we have yet another person who has continued to go down across this week, not because they're in danger for this week, but because they're in danger for future weeks, and I feel like they're also playing kind of sloppily. By number 11, we do have Mickey. And as I talked about last week, I feel like Mickey had a pretty awful HOH where she ended up taking out one of her own allies, which is all pretty bad there. But I feel like despite her not being the primary target for this week, she has continued to go on this pretty massive power trip with her talking about how like she has all these numbers and how she has to weigh out all her options and how she's just been flipping back and forth with what she wants to do with the vote for this week. And I feel like that alone is pretty bad. The fact that she is not really committed to a target for this week, where she has gone from targeting Keanu to targeting Vince and to targeting Zach. And again, I feel like it's just kind of all over the place. But even beyond that, I feel like her relationships have continued to deteriorate, where across this week, she ends up pushing away the likes of Ashley, Rachel, and even Morgan, to where all of them are starting to clock her as a pretty big threat in the future. And they're all talking about potentially taking her out in the future. And I feel like that is another major reason why she has continued to drop, where for one, the fact that she is like so flip-floppy with the vote, but on top of that, the fact that she is also losing these key relationships while not really gaining much in return is all pretty bad. And it's gotten to the point now where she doesn't really gain much no matter what happens this week, where for one, like she has an enemy in Keanu. Keanu has been talking about targeting her, and I feel like Keanu staying would be pretty bad. But even if Vince and Zach both stay, I feel like that's also not great for them, as both of them have talked about being against Mickey at this point. So I feel like at this point, Mickey's in a pretty rough spot. And I feel like with her continuing to playing pretty poorly from her bad HOH, I feel like there's no reason for her to be any higher than number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we have someone who I mentioned not too long ago, but number 10, we do have Morgan. And Morgan came very close to going out this week, where she was pretty widely considered the replacement nominee option. And with Zach having his power, it seemed all for sure that she would be going up in the block, as either Catherine would use the veto, which was a very real possibility, and Ava even entertained the possibility of Catherine using the veto to put a Morgan, or even if Catherine didn't use the veto, Zach would just use his power and open up a spot on the block for Morgan to go on. And it was in a spot to where had Morgan been on the block, she more than likely goes out in any scenario. So I feel like Morgan came so close to going out this week and pretty much only gets saved by Zach choosing greed. So I feel like I can't really give Morgan any credit for staying this week. But even beyond that, I feel like she's still going to be in a pretty bad spot in the future, to where it does seem likely that one of Vince or Zach will be going out this week. And even if they don't, I feel like Morgan's position has continued to weaken, where at this point she has lost her relationship with Mickey as she started to see Mickey as a threat. And I feel like with the amount of people talking about Morgan as a target for the near future, and I feel like with Morgan continuing to spiral in the game, I feel like she's in a pretty rough spot for the near future, as I feel like she is someone who is likely to be targeted within the next couple of weeks. And on top of that, the fact that she was almost taken out this week and gets saved by stuff completely outside of her control was enough to have her here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have the final person that is currently on the block, and here we have Vince. And it's pretty funny how I had Vince and Zach at 1 and 2 last week, and yet here they are both towards the bottom of the list. And it really goes to show what 1H2H can really do on a game like this. And there is still a real shot that he goes out this week, particularly against Keanu, to where if Zach does win the blockbuster, I feel like it'll be a very close vote between him and Keanu. And it will largely come down to what the likes of Catherine, Riley, and Mickey end up doing here. And Ava has also talked about how if it was a tie, that she would vote to evict Vince here. So again, I feel like Vince is not out of the woods by any means. However, I still think he is the safest currently of the 3 nominees, to where I feel like Zach is a pretty clear target at this point, and there is still a shot that Keanu shoots himself in the foot with his antics and turning Mickey against him. So again, there is paths for him to stay, but also just as many paths for him to go out this week. So there's that. Now I will also say that he has not handled being on the block well, to where he ends up spending a lot of the week acting pretty mopey and him just really underestimating the other players, saying that they're not playing the game, which is again just kind of ridiculous for him to say. Though again, I'm not saying Vince is a great player by any means, and I feel like he definitely has made a lot of mistakes across this week, but it's the fact that he is the safest on the block currently. I feel like he is probably the least likely of the 3 to be evicted unless something crazy happens. So it's for that reason that I'm willing to put him a little bit higher, but there is still that possibility that he goes out this week, which is why he is here at number 9. I'm moving on to number 8, and we have yet another person who I feel like has gone down a lot across this week, even though it's not really reflected in their placement here. By number 8, we do have Rachel Riley. And honestly, I think Rachel is in a worse spot now than where she was before, where I feel like at this point, more people have been talking about targeting her, or the likes of Morgan and Vince have talked pretty openly about targeting her next week. And I feel like a lot of that coming from Rachel's own actions, to where you had the whole interaction with Morgan where she ends up lashing out at Morgan simply for suggesting that she be taken to jury, which is something she doesn't want. And beyond that, you also have her like telling Keanu about the heavy hitters, which has gotten back to Vince that Rachel told him that. So I feel like Rachel's someone who has been playing pretty aggressively and definitely swinging for the fences. And a lot of it seeming to stem from her not wanting to be taken to jury, to where she either wants to be taken to the end or goes out pre-jury. And I feel like that's really starting to weigh on her. And I think it's starting to translate into how she plays the game. And this is despite Ava being HOH being a good outcome for her, where I feel like Ava was one of the better case scenarios for her. But even Ava is someone who has talked about not wanting to follow through with the final 2 deal that they had, which is not a great outcome there. And there's still a possibility that this week ends poorly for her, where I feel like Keanu going out would be pretty bad for her position. So I feel like Rachel's someone who is definitely not getting the best out of this HOH as she probably should. And with her also being talked about as a target, and with her also making some pretty sloppy plays across this week, it's kind of hard for me to have her too much higher. But the reason she's at least this high is that 1, she's not on the block, and 2, I feel like she's not as immediate of a target compared to Mickey, but even then, there is still the world where she is targeted in the near future, and there's still a world where she could get a good outcome, where I feel like she has been targeting Vince for a bit, and there is a chance that she gets out Vince this week. That would at least be positive for her. So again, there is at least some minor pros here, though at the same time, I feel like with Rachel not being in the great spot and with everyone just kind of sinking, I feel like it kind of leaves Rachel around the middle of the list for me, where she's here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we have yet another person who is really only this high because everyone else seems to be dropping. But number 7, we do have Kelly. And I think the fact that Kelly is now at the middle of the list, despite her being so low for a lot of the season, really speaks to how much things have really shifted around. Where at the end of the day, I don't think Kelly is a good player, and I still don't think she's in that great of a spot to where people still find her annoying. People still don't really want to work with her. And I feel like she's still someone who I would have a very hard time seeing winning at the end. But at the same time, she is not on the block currently. She is not really being talked about as that big of a target, to where I feel like the likes of Mickey and Rachel, even Vince and Zach, are being seen as bigger targets at this point compared to Kelly. And she does at least have okay reads. I think she has shown that at least. So again, I feel like Kelly has shown some minor improvement in her position in the sense that she's not being as immediate of a target. But really, the reason she's this high and has jumped so much is because the people below her have dropped so much to where it does leave Kelly around this middle of the list, even though I still don't feel that great about her chances overall. But it's enough to land her here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have yet another person who is really only this high because other people have dropped off a lot. But number 6, we do have Catherine. And again, I still think Catherine is not that great of a player. I feel like she is still way too passive in the actual game here. And I still think she is largely sitting in Riley's shadow, where a major reason why she has not been put up and targeted is because other people are afraid that it will upset Riley, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. And while she does finally stand out this week by winning the veto, I feel like that could be more of a net negative, as it could paint more of a target on Riley and Catherine's back moving forward, as it does show that her and Riley are both capable of winning competitions. So I do feel like Catherine's still not in that great of a spot. And I feel like she's largely being kept around due to her connection to Riley, which even then, the fact that the show is focusing so much on that showmance when a lot of that relationship feels kind of manipulative, if you ask me, but whatever. I do think Catherine is at least in an okay spot for the short term, where I feel like she's not really being targeted so long as people care about Riley's opinion in the game. And it's the fact that other people have dropped off more compared to Catherine is what's leaving her at least as high to where she's here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have yet another person who is really only this high due to other people dropping off. And at number 5, we do have Ashley. And I think there's definitely a debate for Ashley being lower here, as there was definitely a possibility she could have gone up this week, where Ava did not have the greatest relationship with Ashley. And there was a moment where Ava did consider putting Ashley up. However, she is eventually talked out of it, which is at least something there. And beyond that, there's also the entire situation with her vote, where she had voted to keep Jimmy, but then tries to change her vote afterwards after realizing that the votes weren't there to keep Jimmy, which was all pretty funny. It really illustrates what Ashley is like as a player in general. However, I feel like she does good enough damage control where she ends up lying about her vote, claiming that she voted out Jimmy, though to be fair, she could have also just genuinely believed that her vote switch counted. And people seem to believe it, which at least is something there. And beyond that, I feel like she's at least getting some ground in the house to where it does seem like she has decent reads. And I think there is a case that she could be building her resume a bit more, such as her catching on to Mickey and wanting to target her, and also building a closer connection to Rachel, which I think could be useful for her as well. Though with that said, I still think she could be in some danger in future weeks. I feel like she's probably more danger actually than Kelly or Catherine are, if I'm being honest. So there's definitely an argument for her being lower. That and also the fact that she was at least considered for the block. But I think the fact that she has shown to be a bit more active of a player and someone who I think could improve more, if I'm being honest, was the main reason why I did decide to go with her a bit higher here. Though really, I don't really feel that high about anyone at this current point. So I guess she's here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, we have someone who I thought was going to be lower, if I'm being honest. And again, I still think this was not a great week for them, but I do expect this person to be in the game for a while at this point. But number 4, we do have Lauren. And obviously, this is a questionable week for Lauren in the sense that she is likely to lose one of her allies in Vince and Zach. Both of them are currently on the block. And there was also a decent possibility she could have been on the block herself, where she was talked about as one of the replacement options. And while Ava did settle on Morgan over Lauren, there was definitely a possibility she could have gone up had Ava had to name more than one replacement, which was definitely a real possibility had Catherine used a veto and Zach used his power. So again, some hairiness there. Though on the other hand, Lauren would have also been pretty safe in that situation to where Vince and Zach would have been bigger targets over her, and with her being more likable than Keanu, it did seem like Lauren would have been pretty safe no matter what had she ended up on the block anyway. But I still think she got pretty lucky by the veto not being used, so there's that. And is still in a prime spot to lose one of her allies there. So again, I do think in a lot of ways this is a net negative. And not to mention the fact that she had lost ground with her relationship with Ava, as they did previously have a final 2, though Lauren did kind of ruin that through her HOH and putting up Will and breaking up the bond. So again, I do think Lauren's predicament this week is somewhat the result of her actions here. Though at the same time, I think Lauren is still someone who should be pretty safe in the future, where even though she could lose one of her allies this week, she is someone who's pretty well liked in the house. And I also think she is less likely to be targeted than a lot of other people here. So I think that's definitely a consideration for why she's at least this high on the list, despite the fact that she is technically going to be on the outs this week. Though at the same time, like, I also still question her win equity, where I still don't think she's being seen as that big of a player, someone that people don't take that seriously. And similar to other people we talked about, she is only this high due to other people dropping off more. And someone had to be number 4, so I guess it's Lauren. So because of that, she's here number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we have a pretty interesting player to get into here, and that is the current head of household, and here we have Ava, who I think has had the best HOH reign of the season so far by a good amount. Though even then, I don't think that's really saying that much, where I think it more so speaks to how bad the other HOHs were compared to how good Ava has been as an HOH. Or on one hand, I feel like she did a good job with her nominations by putting up Keanu, Vince, and Zach with Vince as her target. Though even then, she did consider putting up Ashley at a point and had to be talked out of it by Will. And to be honest, even putting up Keanu is a bit risky, as Keanu is someone who could definitely go out over Vince or Zach. And again, you can definitely question that, but I do think compared to the other HOHs who actively put up their own allies, it's definitely an improvement here. And I had to give Ava at least some credit for that. And I think the other thing to give Ava a little credit for is that she's at least not getting that much blood on her hands to where no one's really talking about targeting Ava. Now there's talking about Ava going up next week. However, I don't think anyone's really targeting Ava, and they're not really seeing like Ava as that big of a player, which is obviously negative in the sense that she is not someone being taken that seriously, but also good in the sense that she's not like being targeted to be taken out next week. So again, I think there are some minor pros to be taken with her HOH, but I also think there's a lot of missed opportunities with her HOH as well, where I feel like she didn't really branch out beyond her own group, where she ends up spending so much time talking to the likes of Will and Ashley and Mickey, and not really branching out to the other side of the house, which makes it pretty apparent to that other side that she's not working with them. And that is a big reason why she's being talked about as a potential pawn for next week. So I feel like Ava has really kind of wasted opportunities to build a power structure. I feel like she's wasted opportunities to build more deals with people and to really leverage her HOH more. And I think that also carries over to the veto decision, where she came off as so indifferent to whether Catherine wanted to use the veto or not, and didn't really gain any leverage from Catherine in making a deal with her through the veto usage or non-usage. So again, I do think that's something to consider. And I think the other thing is that she really had no clue about Zach's power and really spent a lot of the week like seemingly unprepared for the possibility of putting up a second nominee, and kind of gets left out by that not really coming up. But I could definitely see a world where had Zach used the power and like the veto had also been used, she could have been in a pretty rough spot and could have made a bad move, though at the same time she didn't, so there's that. So I still think Ava's coming out this week in probably one of the better positions to make a deep run on the season. I don't think she's going to be that big of a target in the near future. And I think she played her HOH at least competently enough to where I can't really dock her too many points. But at the same time, I still look at her as a pretty passive player, someone who I still don't think is really set up well to actually win the game by the end of it, and someone who, even with her making this pretty big move, is not really doing much to build favor with the other side to deal with the fallout of that move. So I feel like Ava's still someone who I'm not feeling that great about. But again, considering the rest of the field, it's enough to have her here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and really this top 2 is one I'm not super duper proud of. I don't really feel great about either of these two people, but I feel like after the fallout this week and with everything to take into account here, I guess they're left here in the top 2. But number 2, we do have Will. And Will is someone who I do have to give some credit for. I feel like he played somewhat well this week, in the sense that he did have a decent amount of influence with Ava's HOH, where he was a pretty key force in convincing her to not put up Ashley, which would have been a pretty bad move for her. And to be fair, I think Ava was definitely more set on targeting Vince anyway, but I still think Will was able to get into Ava's ear and to get her to not make a mistake there, so I feel like that's pretty good. I think he's also someone who's at least clocking Catherine and Riley and wants to target them moving forward, which is all pretty good. And he's also someone who I think is pretty safe in the game. I don't think anyone's really talking about targeting Will, though at the same time, there's, I think, a possibility he could be used as a pawn in future weeks, though no one's really talking about targeting him. So I do have to give Will a lot of credit for that. And I feel like compared to the rest of the field, I feel like he hasn't really made any mistakes across this week, which I do have to give him some credit for there. Though at the same time, I'm not feeling that great about him long term either. He's still another person who, can I really see winning the season from this point on? Is he really someone who's going to have a ton of respect at the end? I'm not entirely sure. But I feel like for this week at least, he's played well enough to where I do have to give him at least some credit to where he's here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother 27 right now, I guess, is Riley. And I can't believe Riley is number 1 right now. And I'm still not entirely sure what to make of Riley's game. I still don't think he's playing that hard. I still don't think he's really that great of a player, if I'm being perfectly honest. And I think he's kind of riding through a lot of the game right now simply because people like him and are afraid to go against him, which I'm not really sure how much credit to give him at this point. And I'm not really sure how sustainable this position is, where even though for now it seems like people are afraid to go against him and Riley, I still think there's a possibility where people do eventually see Catherine and Riley as his threat, as why would they keep Catherine on the block permanently just because they're afraid of upsetting Riley? So I can definitely see a world where Catherine and Riley are targeted eventually, and I do think Catherine winning the veto this week could be a step in that direction, though we'll have to see what happens there. So I'm still not feeling that great about Riley, and I feel like there's not that much active proof of Riley playing particularly well. But he is still arguably in a great spot right now, where he does seem to be a pretty key swing vote coming into the actual eviction, where it seems like he's going to have a lot of sway and who goes out there, which I do have to give him some credit for there. And I think he is still this archetype of someone who could do well in the future, where it may not matter if he's not playing it actively, as he could just get deep enough into the game to where he could start winning competitions. So I think that's another consideration for me as well. So while I don't really like Riley that much, and I don't think he has really demonstrated himself to be that active of a player, I feel like considering where we're currently at, I feel like it's enough to have Riley here at number 1. And there we go, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps with the channel. Now we'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I'm live streaming the Thursday eviction episode on my channel, so if you want to see my live reaction and like really experience the show with me, feel free to do so. I'm also on Patreon and a YouTube membership, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And you can also do it in the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.